The process of applied functional science is the transformation of the notion into the motion.
You're listening to the Gray Institute podcast, a production of Gray Institute.
Move your body, come on, move your body.
To our Gray Institute podcast. And in the studio today, we have Dr. David Tiberio from the Gray Institute, Dean of the GIFT program, the Gray Institute Functional Transformation Mentorship Program. And we're going to be talking about a thing called applied functional science. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Gary. It's a real pleasure to be able to discuss this with you today. And it's an important topic because, as you know, over the past 40 years, as you would design and create a different perspective on how the body moves, we were challenged to come up with a name for all of the intellectual property / content / information that is part of the Gray Institute.
Why did we come up with applied functional science? I'm sure I may remember this, but actually I think we've used it so often I'm not really sure the origin of it.
Well, certainly if you start in the middle, functional, we knew that a lot of the information out there we didn't consider functional. We had some litmus tests of function based on how we saw the body move. And so as we applied these litmus tests to our own work as well as others, we said, well, what do we believe in? And we said, well, it has to be functional. It has to be practical. In other words, we need to be able to apply it to everyday activities and situations. And it certainly has to be based on the science of how the body moves. And so if you take that it's practical, that it can be applied to everyday activity, and it is based on the truth, we came up with applied functional science.
Applied functional science, as we know, really is the combination of three sciences. Could you just give us an overview of those three sciences and why it's just those three sciences that make up applied functional science?
Well, as I recall, and I hope I'm recalling correctly as I get a bit older here, that we were looking at principles or truths. And those principal truths are the things that drive function. And there were a number of them. And what you did is you said, well, we need to categorize these at least to some degree. Where do they fall into? What bucket? What would they maybe kind of coordinate around or be categorized into? And as we all looked at these things, we said, well, there's things like gravity, ground reaction force, there's momentum, there's aspects or truths of function that come in the physical world, the environment, the things that we can't deny here on Earth. But then we knew there were a lot of things that involved the human body, obviously. How muscles worked, how they're turned on, what role the proprioceptors have, how the body's connected. And those things were really part of our biology. So we came across the term of biological. And then obviously there are things that drive us that are a little bit harder to put our finger on, the things we think about, the things in our heart, our spirit, the things that influence how we react to the environment, how our body reacts to that. And those things we kind of put into a behavioral bucket. At least that's how I remember it.
Actually, that may or may not be the right memory, but I like the explanation. Is when you really think about the human body, it's what's on the outside of us. We have to obey the laws of physics, and so that's that physical science. The human body itself, the biological science, and then inside our human body, as you said, the behavioral drivers things that really drive us that affect movement. So we were just trying to say, okay, what is everything that's out there that's been scientifically proven that influences how we move or how we don't move, influences why we might want to move, why we might not want to move. And if we put all that together, we realize that it's the physics of it all, the biomechanics of it all, and actually the psychology of it all, which we would call applied functional science. And it really, I believe, has helped. Now, some people, when they take a look at a lot of what the Gray Institute does, what you lead us in the gift program. A lot of what's on grayinstitute.com. Some people will say, well, those seem to be functional theories. How would you respond if somebody says, well, tell me about your functional theories?
Well, we don't believe they're theories at all. As you said, they're based on sciences. And when you look into those three different realms of the sciences, there's a tremendous amount of support for the truths or principles of applied functional science. It's not like we're making these things up. If you really delve into it, the proof is there. And these principles and these sciences, to some degree, aren't just in human movement. They cover a vast area of how the world works. And so we believe, and we can support our belief, that there's a lot of research support and truth behind applied functional science.
In this world of what people call evidence-based, I think a big part of, at least in my experience, is that we're missing what we would call the initial evidence. In other words, what evidence do you have that what you're doing is scientifically based or evidence-based? So again, in our day, the big push was for people to sit on a table and strap their leg down and do this thing called an isokinetic dynamometer in order to come up with objective data on the torque ability of the quadriceps and the torque ability of the hamstring. And back then, because of the research that was being done, they would say, well, this is an evidence-based, proven entity of rehabilitation for the knee. We forgot, though, to go to the beginning and say, is there evidence that that environment is even appropriate for the knee? And if we look at the function of the knee, and we look at the physics of the knee and the biomechanics of the knee and what we'd call the behavioral drivers of how the knee really functions, we would find out that that was not a good environment, that was not appropriate. So even though it was labeled as evidence-based, it wasn't even close to being evidence-based. And we even now know that that $40,000 piece of equipment's not even being sold because it actually ate up a lot of knees, because we forgot to ask a real simple question. Does that create an environment where it'll facilitate the function of the knee based on applied functional science? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think if you go back to the piece of equipment you're talking about and the research that was done, I think the movement world and the physical therapy world in particular was seemingly starving for some proof that what we did worked. And so a piece of equipment that gave us a number seemed to be nirvana. It seemed to be the thing that we've been searching for. And we got off track. We lost our sense of the real world. And even if that was a good objective number of something, it wasn't very close to function. And the real issue is it doesn't generalize to the real world. So you might say, well, 2 weeks ago we got X number and now we get 2X number, and basically now we say, so what? It doesn't matter because it's meaningless in terms of your ability to go out there and do the things you want to do in everyday life.
Yeah. I like the way you kind of, we every once in a while we do lose our way, and I think sometimes it's important to go on a journey where maybe the purpose is to lose our way, but to come back. And again, I think we have utilized applied functional science as that guidance, as that way to come back and to really determine, are we doing things because we kind of think it's the right thing, or it's our thought process, it's our theory, or exactly what is it? I know you've heard the story, but the story is kind of cute, where a doctoral physical therapy student called me and indicated that her professor wanted her, as part of her doctoral program, to basically disprove many of the Gray Institute theories. When I asked her on the phone why she thought the professor wanted her to do that, she says, because the professor says you guys teach a lot of things actually not only different, but maybe just the opposite of what we're learning in physical therapy school. And so therefore our theories need to be proven to be wrong, and it may be a way to kind of keep us a little more quiet than out there trying to share what we would call the truth of function. when she went through applied functional science, when she was introduced to the modules of applied functional science on our grayinstitute.com website, she literally got back to me the next day and said, I have a problem. Then I said, what's your problem? She says, you don't have theories, you're just teaching truths. Applied functional science is pure truth, and based on the truth, she says, I can now make decisions on what to do as opposed to somebody telling me a protocol. And I said, so what do you think about that? And she goes, that's what I want. That's what we all should want. And in fact, she even contended that our education, at least our movement education, physical therapy, athletic training, strength trainers, orthopedic surgeons, chiropractors, anybody to do with enhancing the movement of the human body, she said, should be founded upon applied functional science. Needless to say, her professor was not happy with that response and gave her another assignment. But I think we feel very content of continuing to dig up a lot of the science that's out there in those three domains and using that science in order to guide us. What's the process that we use? In other words, we can share a lot of things about what gravity does and ground reaction force and how the body moves in three planes of motion as a chain reaction driven by the hands and the eyes and the feet, and that really what's in our heart and the fact that we're successful drives us more. But how do we use that truth? How do we transform that truth? What's the process?
Well, it's a relatively simple yet at the same time profound process, because if you take the word truth, so the truths of how we move, and you say there are common principles, and we start to look into what are those principles, and you know that a number of these podcasts are going to be based solely on the different principles of applied functional science. When we introduce these principles or truths to people, they can't refute them. They don't deny them. In fact, they don't need to be convinced. They accept them. Yes, that's the truth. That alone won't help us, but the process is a PST process. The P, obviously, for the principles or truths, but the S stands for the strategies. And the strategies are the things, the plans that we utilize to both assess and examine, as well as train, rehabilitate, and design programs for injury prevention. The strategies must come from the principles or truths. Once you have a good strategy, it becomes pretty easy to decide what particular techniques or exercises are going to make that strategy come to life.
Yeah, actually, if we listen carefully to the introductory music and the introductory words to our podcasts, you'll kind of hear with an echoing that it's the transformation of the notion into the motion, which simply means it's the PST process. It's the transformation, which is the strategy of the notion, what we know to be true, into the motion, into the techniques. And as you know, we were trained as a technique-driven training format. We went to school, they said, here's what you're going to see, here's some symptoms, and here's a protocol, here's some techniques to do to make it all better. At no time did we ask a serious question, and that is why that technique and why not some other techniques? In other words, what strategies are we following that guide us into those techniques, and therefore what truths are these strategies based on? And therefore, for us as people just wanting to get healthier, understanding that following applied functional science and the PST process is powerful. But I think even more importantly, if we have a responsibility to teach others, and especially the responsibility to train and treat others, we should constantly be asking ourselves, why are we doing this? Is it because somebody told us in school? Did we read it in an article? Was it part of a certification we took? Are we willing to ask the critical question, why? And all of our whys, we hope, that can go back to what we call the truths of applied functional science.
Yes, that's a great way to put it, Gary, because if what we're doing are the exercises, the movements, the techniques, really the strategy tells us why we're doing that. And if the strategy has been derived from the principles, we've got a coherent system, and we can answer that question. And I think the other big advantage that it really gives us, and I'll speak for myself, when I had a new patient coming in, whether I had seen this, quote, diagnosis before or not, there was always a fear that I didn't know enough. I didn't have enough in my brain already to meet the challenge, the unknown challenge that I was going to see represented in this client who was just seeking some help. In the PST process, it's not really that we have to know everything ahead of time. It's that we utilize movements in order to have that person show us what their body can do. We ask functional questions through movement, and we watch and see how the body answers those questions.
I think as we're learning applied functional science and knowing and hopefully being humble enough to know that we don't know it all, we realize that there are some big rocks of applied functional science that apply to everything. And there's some other subtle things that creep up and we're learning kind of as we go. Even right now, I know you're under a big study on understanding the architecture of human living fascia. What is fascia? What is it? How is it made? What does it do? How does it influence the body? And it's amazing scientific proof. It's some really good stuff. But at the end of the day, we need to take that true science of what is this fascia that connects our entire body and kind of holds us together, so to speak. And we have to ask the question, so what? Well, what are we going to do with that information? Well, how will that develop strategies to allow that person in front of us to take advantage of that knowledge so they can now move better? What can we do in order to accomplish that? I know in our 3D MAPS program, we spend a great deal of time establishing applied functional science principles. So the person who gets certified just isn't doing a bunch of assessments because somebody said, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to count up to a number, and you'll finally get to a point in life where you say, I don't even know why I'm doing it. Where the practitioner literally goes, I can tell you why I'm doing this. I can tell you why I don't lay somebody down on their back and have them lift their leg up. I can tell you why it doesn't make any sense, according to science of human movement, to put somebody on all fours and have them point their hand out or point their foot back. Or it makes absolutely no sense to have somebody reach behind their back and look at an isolated motion of the shoulder. Certainly those are tests, but if we look at the truth of human movement, how the body really moves, and the science of applied functional science, and it drives the strategies, all of a sudden we're doing things because they make sense to us, not because somebody told us to do it or it was just part of something that we learned. And for a lot of us, that's a challenge because we have to unlearn a lot before we can literally learn that. What are some other things relative to applied functional science that just come to your mind that you would like to share with our listeners that you believe would empower them with the ability to say, this is kind of a path I want to pursue and this seems to make sense to me?
Well, my last comment about that anxiety about the client coming in, I think affects a lot of what we do. And what applied functional science does is it says, not only do I not have to know it all ahead of time, and I'm going to allow my client to show me what they do well and what they may not do as well, it also allows me to be confident that if what I typically do with a client and it usually works, now with this client doesn't work, I'm not stuck. I'm not locked into this algorithm. I'm not locked into this step-by-step process that I have to go through in a sequence or at a certain time. None of that is part of the applied functional science approach. What we call people who utilize AFS are applied functional scientists. And as movement practitioners, they're able to adjust and adapt to any little change, and they're able to create a program that's specifically designed for that individual and can adapt to that individual.
I really love that approach, simply because, again, my biggest fear is I'm going to let somebody down, that I'm kind of in a corner and I can't figure it out. I have nothing else to offer them. I don't really know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just following a script or following a certification or following what I learned in school. And I know we all, especially as human beings, we're driven, the behavioral driver there again, we're driven by the need and the want to be significant to others. And as you and I both know, as people learn applied functional science, their significance gets much greater, but their confidence and their competence in their significance gets much greater, like you just said. The fear of potentially letting somebody down. I think one of the strengths of applied functional science, at least in my life, is I can evaluate somebody and also look them dead in the eye and say, based on what my understanding of the science of human movement, I don't believe I can help you. So it's not always, wow, I'm going to use this AFS approach, and when you get done with me, you're going to be moving better and have less pain and enjoy life more. Sometimes it's as simple as, I think I need to get you to somebody else who has a different set of tools, has a different expertise, has a different approach on this, where my understanding of the human body via AFS, Applied Functional Science, is telling me that I don't believe I can create an environment to help you right now, and we're going to find out somebody else who can give you that help. So as you said, we're kind of getting old, but as we get old, we realize that it's kind of good to know and to have this warmth in our heart when we finally go home at night and kind of tuck everybody in, that we did our best, and we did it because we were studying what the human body really does, and we have the ability to sometimes help people, but also admit that we can help people.
Yeah, I think that, to summarize what you just said, is another saying that I've really taken to heart that you often will tell people is, we take what we do real seriously, but, and I'll paraphrase a little here, Gary, but because of how limited our understanding is, we can't take ourselves too seriously. As long as we're willing to admit we don't know, but we're willing to try and learn, and we're going to utilize applied functional science to do that, it's pretty easy to go to sleep at night.
I would like to welcome our listeners to log on to grayinstitute.com and follow along and see some of the many presentations and videos where you can see how we're working hard at understanding applied functional science, and we take those scientific truths and apply them to powerful strategies, and then with the strategy we come up with new and exciting and dynamic ways and environments to help people. And we believe that together, if we journey together in this, that it's going to be more effective, more efficient, more powerful for all of us to understand AFS and to apply AFS and to literally create the environments that can change lives, that can actually transform lives through the transformation of the notion into the motion. So Dave, really appreciate your insights into this. I appreciate your leadership of applied functional science. We appreciate how well you teach it and learn it and apply it in the GIFT program, and we definitely appreciate all your contribution to our journey through the Gray Institute in the world of applied functional science.
You have been listening to the Gray Institute podcast. For more information, please visit us at www.grayinstitute.com.